what happened when war comes to Southeast Asia in December 1941? And listeners hopefully have heard of things like the invasion of Malaya on the 8th of December. That's the same day as the attack on Pearl Harbor. Obviously, the difference in date is time zone related. They are pretty much simultaneous. So, yeah, what was actually happening in December 41?
Well, I mean that particular day, the 7th of December, of course, at Pearl Harbor, and the 8th at in Malaya. The same day, in fact, the invasion of Malaya took place 2 hours before Pearl Harbor, and I've been reading a number of books at the moment, and they all still make the mistake. They think there's a day different, and it's simply not. It's different time zone. Well, okay, so the first attacks on Burma actually came from the air on the 23rd of December 1941, a couple of weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor and Malaya. And the second came a couple of days later on Christmas Day. They caused absolute mayhem, Jack. The mass evacuation of the city, they caused enormous terror and panic. This, of course, wasn't expected. About half of the city's population was Indian. And because the relationship between the Indians and the Burmese wasn't particularly good, we'll touch on that in a later episode. Many Indians fled the city, believing that the attacks by the Japanese actually presaged an attack on them. And as a result, all essential services in the city, most of which were undertaken by Indian labor, just stopped immediately. And it's fair to say that war came as a really considerable shock to Burma. Burma had had its head in the sand for a very long time. No one in the government in Rangoon had ever expected the country to be in danger of attack. Certainly not from the Japanese. Singapore, perhaps, but not Burma. Just think about how difficult it is to get into Burma. We've already talked about the fact that Burma is 1,000 miles. Burma would require 1,000 miles of road for the Burma army to be supported from India. A similar effort would be required by the Japanese. And as a consequence, when the British in particular sat down and looked at the requirements for the defense of Burma up until 1941, they dismissed entirely the possibility of an invasion.
Yeah, and Rob, what you're saying there about the chaos that was caused in Rangoon at the time does remind me a little bit of Tony Maines, who was the head of field security division in the area. He talked about how, the local Indian police force, essentially tried to flee through the railway station that he was sort of organising the evacuation. And having to, threaten the use of violence to stop them from charging through the barriers and so on, because they were so scared of what the Japanese would do to Indian police in Burma.
Well, no, absolutely. And Tony Maines, his memoirs are fabulous, and this whole period was dramatically tragic. I mean, the truth is that Burma was a colonial backwater.
Mm.
Indeed, its very insignificance suggested that it would be secure.